What happens in that period as we are getting ready to transition from this life to the next? Are there phases of transition, and do angels, spirit guides, and family and friends from beyond help us to prepare for that transition? Is there judgment awaiting us on the other side, or is judgment a man-made belief? Do people who die tragically sometimes not realize they are dead and stay in this earthly realm as ghosts, or do some simply choose to stay? Do we reincarnate and live multiple lives? Psychic and medical intuitive Julie Ryan joins me on the show as we explore these questions and much more. Well, greetings and welcome once again to Passion for the Paranormal, bringing a passion for the paranormal to you. Yes, I am your host, Curry Stegan, and I'm so excited to be back here with you once again. I've got a wonderful guest joining me tonight, and she is none other than Julie Ryan. And Julie Ryan is a multi-talented person. She's not only a very successful businesswoman, she's an entrepreneur, she's an inventor, she is also a medical intuitive, a psychic, and an author, all rolled up into one. And she's going to be talking to me about a subject that's really near and dear to everybody's hearts. After all, none of us are getting out of this world alive. Death is something we are all going to experience, and she's going to be talking to me partly about what it's like in the transition as we're getting ready to transition from this world into the next life. And, she's going to be talking to me about some of the things that we may experience as we're going through that transition. And it's going to be a fascinating discussion, and I'm so glad you're here to tune into the show. I really think it's going to be a great one. If you haven't been over to the Facebook page yet, please head over to facebook.com/passion, the number 4, the paranormal, and please like and follow us there. Also, please make sure you visit the website at passion, the number 4, the paranormal.com, and there you can catch up with past episodes. If you have a great ghost story or another type of paranormal experience you'd like to share with us, you can share it on the website there, whether it's a ghostly encounter, a UFO sighting, or Bigfoot sighting, any of those sorts of things, or any other unexplained experience you had that you'd like to share. Please go on there and share that with us. We'd love that. Please make sure you check out the new Passion for the Paranormal merchandise. We've got some great new hoodies, t-shirts, coffee mugs, with a great professionally designed Passion for the Paranormal artwork on them. Make great gifts coming into the holidays. It's also a great way to support the show. So go on there and check out the new products available. I think you'll really like them. Pick up a hoodie or a t-shirt or a mug. Some great gifts on there. So without further ado, I'd really like to get into this discussion with Julie. I really think it's going to be a good one. Hey, please make sure if you know somebody you think that would like to tune into the show, a family member, a friend, a coworker, please share a link with them. Word of mouth is a great way to spread the word. Again, thank you for joining us. I think you're really going to enjoy tonight's show. Okay, so my guest tonight is Julie Ryan. And Julie is an inventor, entrepreneur, psychic, and medical intuitive, and is author of the book, Angelic Attendants, What Really Happens as We Transition from This Life into the Next. Julie's psychic skills are learned, and she uses her abilities to help comfort those caring for dying loved ones and helps them to understand their purpose in life and the bigger picture of transitioning from this life into the next. Julie, thank you so much for joining me on the show tonight.
You're welcome. Thanks so much for having me. What a treat.
Yeah, no, it's an honor to have you on the show. And wow, you are a lady of many talents, an entrepreneur, a medical intuitive, and a psychic all rolled in one. That's fascinating. And as I understand it with your story, you didn't come into this, or you weren't born with this ability. It was kind of a learned ability. Can you talk a little bit about how that came into being for you, or how that journey went for you?
Sure, absolutely. I believe that all of us are born with intuitive abilities, Curry. We certainly have all experienced the phenomena of we think of somebody and then they call us, or we run into them seemingly out of the blue and we think, oh my gosh, what a coincidence. But there are no coincidences in life. That's our intuitive abilities that are working there for us, but we just don't pay attention to them and or sometimes discount them. when we get signs or inspiration. We don't follow it. And most of us have experienced not following our inspiration and then we regret it down the road. So I am not one of those psychics who's had dead people chasing her since childhood. Or if I was, I didn't know it, let alone what I would have done about it. So I learned how to be a medical intuitive and psychic. And how I came upon this was 25, 26 years ago. I had a friend give me a book by Carolyn Mace called Anatomy of the Spirit. And Dr. Mace considers herself, she calls herself a medical intuitive. And I'm an inventor of surgical devices sold throughout the world, Curry. So I've always been interested in medical stuff because I was in that industry for over 30 years. And I had never heard the term medical intuitive before. And so I thought, well, I read the book. I was interested in learning more. And that was before we had Amazon or the internet, really, to any great extent. So I did the old fashioned thing. I went to a bookstore to see if they had anything else about that. And I found a book by a woman named Barbara Brennan, who's a former NASA physicist who parlayed quantum physics lingo and terminology into understandable English for the non-scientific mind, which that would be me, and read her book, and it was all about energy healing. And then I wanted to learn more, so I called her school and asked if they had any graduates in my area who were teaching this stuff, and sure enough, they did. So I studied with a woman, still am in touch with her, still see her or talk to her once a month. Her name's Susan Austin-Crumpton, and studied with her for 6 years. Spent the equivalent of what I would have spent in graduate school to learn how to do this stuff. I tell people, Curry, I'm a businesswoman and an inventor who learned how to do woo-woo, and I'm a buffet of psychicness.
Now that must have been interesting for you because you were an entrepreneur and a business lady. Now, did you kind of get to have people be taken aback when you told them about your psychic abilities as well, being that you were, an entrepreneur and involved in business?
Oh, yeah. People thought I was nuts, including my own family, until they needed my help, and I nailed whatever they had going on, even before the doctors did. And then they went and had an x-ray or something, and the doctors validated what I had told them already. And then, I wasn't quite as kooky as they thought.
Yeah, can you kind of just talk about what exactly a medical intuitive is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am able to raise my vibrational level to the level of spirit, because we're all spirits attached to a body having a human experience. Probably heard that before, and I'm sure most of your listeners have heard that at some point. And that's what I perceive. And so when our spirit's attached to our body, Curry, we vibrate more slowly simply because the body has mass. It would be the equivalent of running an electrical current through a bowl of pudding. It's going to slow it down because of the mass of the pudding. So I've learned to raise my vibrational level to the level of spirit. I turn my abilities on and off at will. I don't walk around scanning people because I don't believe that's ethical. And so I close my eyes, I watch a laser beam go from my body, wherever I am, and connect into whomever I'm scanning anywhere in the world. I'm rarely with people when I scan them. Less than 1% of the time am I with somebody. And then I shoot energy from their feet up through the top of their head. Again, in my mind's eye, I'm able to see the equivalent of an MRI or a CT scan or an X-ray. I can see in my mind's eye, I'm like a human MRI. I can see broken bones, torn ligaments, viral infections, bacterial infections, cancer, tumors, whatever. And I can tell if somebody's dying or not. And I can tell how close to death they are.
That's interesting. So even if you're remote, just like you and I are, you can still sense that. Is that correct?
Well, I
And still
see it
see
in
it.
my mind's eye. Yeah.
Wow.
And
And that,
so if you had a broken arm, you were complaining about your arm, the energy would go right to where the break was. I would be able to describe to you where the break was. I married a man with 3 grown children when we were married 20 years ago, and so I have 5 grandsons by marriage. And one of our youngest grandsons, Sam, who's now be 12 in a couple of weeks. When he was little, 3 or 4, his mom, my stepdaughter Holly, called and she said, Sam fell off the swing set and he's holding his arm and complaining that it hurts a lot. Can you scan it? And they were about 15 miles from me. And so I scanned it and I said, yeah, it's broken. Here's where it's broken. I'll meet you at Children's Hospital's ER. And I did. And, and we walked in and his mom said to the nurse and the techs, well, he's got a broken arm and here's where it's broken. And they looked at her like she was nuts. And then sure enough, that's where it was broken.
That's interesting because I've had other guests on the show. Stephen Holly Martin was one of them. He's the author of The Afterlife, The Whole Truth. And there's a subtitle there that I don't remember. But we got into the discussion about consciousness.
Uh-huh.
And how consciousness is, not just local to the brain. So
Right.
your abilities seem to, to help prove that point, that consciousness is not just local to the brain. It is actually outside of the brain and is something that, and that's the thing that fascinates me about this kind of thing so much is, some people I think refer to it as psi phenomena. This idea of kind of telekinesis or telepathic communication, is this kind of the same thing we're talking about here?
It is. And remote viewing. And every spirit, Curry, has a frequency that at which it vibrates, similar to a radio station. The jazz station it broadcasts on 94.7 or whatever. And so if you're on 94.7 in your car in a certain city, you're going to get the music that radio station is broadcasting. Similar to that, what I perceive is that our spirits all are on a frequency and we keep that same frequency through all lifetimes for forever. So that's how I'm able to access past lives, future stuff, current stuff, and I'm able to access any spirit, deceased or alive, anywhere. It doesn't matter where they are. I talked to someone in Paris this morning, did a private consult with someone in Paris. I will be talking to someone in Sweden tomorrow. And I watch a laser beam come from my body and hook into their body wherever they are. And it's so funny because it goes directionally across maps. Like I'll see it go directionally across the Atlantic Ocean. I live in Alabama. I live in Birmingham. And so it'll go directionally from there. And it's a riot. It's fascinating. But I've done it for so long now that I don't even think about it. It's just second nature to me.
It's amazing. And so this vibration that you're talking about, is this kind of some synonymous with frequency? So maybe I'm not tuned to the right frequency. I'm a paranormal investigator, and I've done it for years. And I do seem to sense energy with my body sometimes. I don't commune with the dead per se. But is this just maybe just don't have the right vibration or I'm not tuned to the right frequency to be able to do that?
Yeah, you have to learn how to raise your vibrational level. And that's what I teach in my classes, Curry, is I transfer the vibrational level where I play onto my students so that they can reach that vibrational level and then they're able to access whatever they want to access. If they want to communicate with the dearly departed, if they want to scan somebody who's alive, if they want to communicate with a pet, if they want to do a past life thing or communicate with a spirit guide or an angel or whatever. It's about being at a high vibration level.
Now, this concept of spirit guides, then you mentioned angels too. Are they sometimes one and of the same, or are they two different entities?
Two different entities as I perceive it. Angels have a different frequency than spirit guides. Spirit guides it would be like comparing a dog to a dandelion, totally different species. In my experience of doing this work for 26 years. So angels are always angels. Spirit guides are spirits that have incarnated in multiple lifetimes and they act as guides. So do angels, for that matter, but different species.
So, in other words, at some point along our spiritual journey, we can become spiritual guides.
Correct. Correct.
All right.
And
And
spirits, too, spirits and angels are not male or female, they're just energy. And when we incarnate and have a lifetime, have a human life, we decide to incarnate as a human, then we'll take on a sex. And it's interesting with angels because angels have names that we equate with male and female a lot of the times. And sometimes angels will have names that I will get a name phonetically, I'll spell it phonetically, but it's coming in so I can understand it in English, but it's not necessarily a language that a human would know. It might be some ancient language, it might be some language from a different reality or a different planet or a different whatever. Every once in a while, there'll be some name that comes in that's just really bizarre sounding to me. And so sometimes the names sound very ancient, and I'll ask the angel if they have a nickname in mind that they'd like for the person that they're with to call them. And a lot of times they do. It's pretty cute.
yeah, so some of those are probably pretty difficult for the normal person to pronounce then if they're, ancient like that, or so maybe it's just a little bit easier.
Right.
What the other thing that I wanted to ask is what was your sense prior to getting this ability and learning this? What was did you have more of a scientific view of the world prior to that? How did it change your sense of things? Were you spiritual before you learned this ability, or how did that happen?
I was raised Roman Catholic, 12 years of Catholic schools. So I was brought up as a small child from the time I was a small child up to hear about saints and angels and, Jesus and God and the Virgin Mary and all of that. And interestingly enough, my mother and my grandmother, when we were growing up, if they lost something, they would say this prayer to St. Anthony, and it was, Tony, Tony, look around, something's lost and must be found. And a lot of the time they'd find it, and they'd say a prayer of thanks to St. Anthony. That's kind of an old fashioned prayer. So I think I had the basis of angels and saints, and they're throughout the Bible and they're throughout lots of religions, certainly the Catholic religion. And then when I started getting into this stuff, I found that it validated a lot of the stuff that I'd been taught as a child. And when it didn't make sense to us in school, we were always just told, well, it's a mystery. That's where faith comes in. And now I find, especially with a lot of the healings that I do, Curry, it's remarkable how science is catching up with a lot of this stuff. I will see certain healings. I have an advisory board of surgeons and other doctors and geneticists and psychologists and other researchers. And if I see a healing and I don't know what it means, and I see it multiple times, every once in a while that'll happen, and I'll call them up and I'll say, okay, what am I seeing? And they'll explain to me what I'm seeing, and invariably they'll say things like, there's no way in hell you would know about this. I said, well, obviously I do, because I just described it to you. Because I have a degree in communication. I mean, I am not a scientific mind by any means, but
Sure.
but I know how to read and I know how to search stuff on the internet, and it's amazing what I can find.
So, do you actually get premonitions as well of things, kind of a view of things that come to pass? Does that
Mm,
happen for you?
Sometimes I have, not so much. What I find is that things that have happened in the past are set, things that are happening right now are set, things that are happening in the future have so many variables that can change the outcome that I always tell people that future events are fluid. I can tell you what I'm getting at this moment as far as what I think is going to happen, but that could be different tomorrow because there's so many variables that come into play, my decision, someone else's decision, things like that, whether, there are, our human minds don't have the capacity to envision all of the potential outcomes with all the different variables. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, do you sometimes, is this usually just kind of a telepathic communication? Do you sometimes see spirits, or is this primarily just, kind of the telepathic type communication?
Both, all the above, all the above. I see spirits, I hear spirits, I can feel spirits, all of it. I can smell them. Sometimes I'll smell perfume or a scent, but I'm a visual learner. So my information a lot of the time will come in visually well, it always does visually if I'm scanning somebody or if I'm talking to someone's deceased loved one. The person's spirit that is deceased of their deceased loved one always shows up. They know we're talking about them. It's like they come in because they know we're talking about them, and they always stand to the person's right. And then other spirits will show up too. But it's funny because I hear mediums say, okay, well, we'll do a session and we'll see who's going to show up. Well, I'm like, who do you want to talk to? We pull them in. You want to talk to your dead grandma? Do you want to talk to Einstein? You want to talk to Benjamin Franklin? You want to talk to Napoleon? Who do you want to talk to? We'll talk to them. And then you just pull them in. Because as soon as you think of them, again, every spirit has a frequency. You want to talk to Napoleon. Napoleon's got a frequency. We tap into that frequency. He's immediately available.
Wow. I would think some people would want to talk to JFK
Mm-hmm.
and want to know how he was assassinated.
Yeah, maybe. I
That's,
haven't had anybody ask me that, but
I would
maybe.
love to know that. I really would love to know that, because I'm one of those that believe that there was more than one shooter
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I just asked the question when you posed that, and I asked, was JFK shot by Lee Harvey Oswald? And I got to know.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Was he? Well, let me rephrase that. Spirits are really literal too, Curry. So you have to be really concise and really specific how you ask the questions. So let's play with it. Let's see, you know, see what JFK is standing to your right. He's standing at your right shoulder. So let's ask him some questions.
Yeah, so I would like to know, and hopefully this doesn't sound a little too oddballish. Um, I guess I would like to know if he had any knowledge when he was president about the UFO issue, and
Yes.
whether or not that had anything to do with his death.
No.
Okay,
No.
interesting.
So
Uh,
was it a mob hit? Yes.
and I've
What?
always wondered that. I've always
Yeah.
wondered whether there was mob involved. And I'm wondering if it had something to do with the Cuban Bay of Pigs incident. I know the CIA, as least of what I've read about it, the CIA had blamed him, and there was kind of finger pointing going back and forth on that issue. So I don't know if that was part of it. Um,
Here's what I got right before you said that. There was a Cuban element involved, but it was the Cuban element with the mob.
oh
The
wow,
mob had a lot of operations going on in Cuba, and so there's lots of experts that believe that the mob helped get him elected, that his father called in some markers with some mob guys in West Virginia and elsewhere, and and then he was coming. His brother was coming after the mob, was coming after organized crime.
yes, he
So
was.
I got that there was definitely a Cuba connection. Did it involve communism in Cuba? No, it was the mob. It was mafia
Wow.
related.
I could ask other questions, but they're probably potentially dangerous to ask.
Okay, we'll do that on we'll do
So
that on a private call.
yeah, maybe I want to, I have these questions popping into my head, and I go, yeah, that's probably not a question. I'm an Air Force retired officer. It's probably not a question I want to be asking. But I just I have this impulse almost to ask the question, but I better not. I'll
Yeah.
leave that
Well,
one.
we'll talk when we're done recording. How about that?
Yeah, that would be fascinating. All
Okay.
right.
What?
The
Thank you for your service. What was your rank when you retired?
I retired as a reservist. I actually did 12 years of active duty and then retired as an IMA reservist as a lieutenant colonel.
Wow. Thank you
Yeah.
for your service. My husband is an Air Force brat. His
Um,
dad, was a career guy and then got out and then did another 20 years as a civilian. And my husband is an Air Force veteran as well. So, yeah, thanks for your service.
Interesting. And I have to tell this little anecdotal story because it's kind of funny. It's funny that you mentioned the mob because I have a sister-in-law and, she was younger and her friends were playing with a Ouija board and they asked that very question,
Yeah.
how JFK was assassinated. And she said the word mob came up
Uh,
on the board. So
yeah.
the other thing that I want to talk about, so there's this idea that some spirits are kind of staying or hung in this earthly realm.
Uh-huh.
And do you think there's some spirits that are just not ready to move on? Are they kind of stuck here? And if so, what helps them to kind of move on?
Yeah, they're called ghosts. That's what ghosts are, uh, what we refer to as ghosts. And ghosts they just have unfinished business. They don't know they're dead, even though they are. And I've worked with several ghosts and gotten them to move on into the light. Normally, what happens is I will call in other family members of theirs who will call them into the light. In heaven, Curry looks to me like a big, brilliant white, yellowish plasma wall. And there's no top or bottom, no sides to it. It's endless. But when we go through it, it's like a plasma screen. It opens up, then it immediately closes, and you can't tell there was ever any opening. It's really interesting. And then when we come back out, same thing. So what I do is I in my book I talk about that. There was a um, train wreck in this building. Well, there's a train wreck near a building. I didn't know about it till I was in the building, and a friend of mine who's a retired Air Force colonel, by the way, I met him at his office, and he said, come with me. I'm going to go lock up the building. I want to check the building. So we get downstairs in the lower level, and he said, "Are you picking up anything?" I said, "Like what?" He said, "Like any spirits," because they all said the building was haunted. And I said, "Well, I don't know. I don't have my radar turned on. Let me turn on my radar." So I did, and I saw this scene of a makeshift morgue in this building, in the basement of this building. And I thought, and I mean, it was all offices and stuff. And I thought, okay, this is bizarre. And there's this whole scene that was there, and there were a bunch of spirits there that I got to go into the light that were still looking for their deceased loved ones. Come to find out, they were telling me the spirits were that there had been a train wreck, a train had derailed, and so it was a makeshift morgue. So I was telling a friend about it, and she looked it up, and she found that there was a TB epidemic at the time, and she said, could it have been? We found the story about the train wreck, but only 12 people died, and there were way more bodies in this morgue than 12. And so my girlfriend said, well, could it have been a makeshift TB ward? Back in the day, this was at the turn of the 20th century. So they were dressed in period clothing. The women had long skirts on and hats and stuff like that. And so anyway, I said, well, maybe. And sure enough, that's what it was. Because back then, whether it was TB or malaria or whatever, people would leave their loved ones, go to work, and they'd come home and they'd be dead. And so they'd have to get the bodies out because they didn't have embalming and they didn't have the capabilities that we have today for that. So it was wild. And that's one of the chapters in my book. My book talks about what happens as somebody is dying. And then there are stories, there are a handful of stories, I know maybe 10 of them, about families with whom I've worked that really had glorious experiences, really miraculous experiences of things that happened. as their loved one was dying.
Yeah, the other thing that I'm really fascinated with is this idea of past life regression.
Hmm.
Now, you've got the young 4-year-old boy that remembers being a World War II pilot. I know that's a real famous case. But why is it, from your perspective, that some people seem to remember, uh, have some sort of memory of past lives where most of us don't?
What I find is that little children remember most of the time if they're prompted, and I have moms that contact me often who say my 3-year-old just described the scene in a battle, or in another state where he lived, and there's no way he would know about Washington D.C. and about, he described the Capitol and the Washington Monument and the White House and all of that. And she said, this kid doesn't read yet. There's no way he would know this stuff. So what I find is that filters come on little people at the age of about 6 or 7, Curry, and then we tend to forget those things unless we're hypnotized or unless we work with somebody like me who can access them. Again, I go on the frequency of that person's spirit, and we can go wherever we want to go with that. And it's like I'm watching these little mini movies in my mind. I'll get where they live, what the time was, what they were doing, a little bit about their life. And I had a guy not too long ago. It was fascinating. He had been a British admiral in the late 1700s, and we got his name, and he was commander of the Atlantic Fleet, and he was involved in some big naval battle that involved the French, and I got the year and everything, and we looked it up, and by George, everything was there. Here's this naval admiral's name, here's the battle with the French Navy. I mean, I don't know British naval battle history. There's no way I could come up with this stuff. So we got all of that, and then we correlated how that is affecting this man's life. How did that past life? How is it affecting his current life? And that's always fascinating. But oh yeah, we get dates and times and names, and a lot of this stuff we can corroborate with historical documents. Like there was one a few days ago, I think it was late last week, that I got that somebody had lived in Spain. They had been a sailor. They were on the spice route to India and Asia, and I mean all this stuff. And then we looked at it, and sure enough, everything was corroborated with information we found online. It's really fun.
Have you found that people's ailments, their fears, their phobias often come from past lives? Say
Uh,
I'm very afraid of spiders. Is that something that may have come from past life? I don't know, phobias and fears and that sorts of things.
Possibly, or something that happened to you as a young child, or somebody saying, stay away from that spider. If it bites you, it's going to kill you, if it's Black Widow or something like that. And then as a little child, you're just thinking, oh my gosh, every spider is going to, if it bites me, it's going to kill me. What I find is that there's a main script, if you will, that can play out over multiple lifetimes. And it reminds me of an analogy in that the movie A Star is Born that was out last fall with
Good
Lady
movie.
Gaga and Bradley Cooper, that was a fourth remake of that movie. Certainly, same script, different timeline, different cast of characters, different setting. And that's what I see happen in multiple lifetimes, is that there will be a main theme, and then each lifetime will be, and it's fairly general. It's a fairly general theme. And each, like betrayal, for instance, and each lifetime will have a different perspective on betrayal. For instance, maybe in one lifetime you're a child that feels betrayed. Maybe in the next time you're a parent that feels betrayed. Maybe in the next time you're the betrayer. Maybe in the next time you're the sister of, or the wife of, or the whatever, friend of. And so we look at the same issue from different vantage points, because I believe that we're all created in human form so that we can co-create with God, and that spirits think it's really fun to incarnate, because when you're in heaven, it's just like you think of it, and it's there. You don't have to really work at anything or create anything. And spirits, it's been my experience and what I've heard over the years is that spirits just see everything as neutral. Something we see as good or something we see perhaps as horrific, they just see it as an experience. And so to them, it's fun to just be able to experience things and have to figure out how to create things. So each lifetime I find that we build in what we create and what we experience of perhaps the same basic script, if you will, or the same basic theory or premise.
Is it always our choice in spirit to come back
Yes.
to this earthly realm?
Yes.
Okay, so it's not something that's more or less mandated for us. We make the
No.
decision to come back.
Yes. Yeah.
Because
And we attach to our mom's energy field before we're conceived. And it looks like an orb that you see in a picture. When you see orbs in a photograph, maybe a family photograph, people go, oh, the light was screwy. No, those are spirits. Our digital cameras can just capture them because
so
they
we
take the
always
picture
refer
so
to those
fast.
as dust or water vapor.
Yeah. No, they're spirits. So oftentimes I'll have somebody send me a picture and they'll say, okay, who are these spirits in this picture? And I'll name like some dead great aunt or, or somebody that there's no way I would know these people's names, but we come up with who the spirits are that are represented in those orbs. But babies' orbs hold on to the mother's energy field in there, and I see them above the mother's shoulder. And interestingly enough, I'll see twins like above both shoulders if twins are going to be born. I'll see babies in birth order, and they're lined up in the distance. They remind me of driving by an airport at night, Curry, where the planes are getting ready to land. They have their landing lights on, and they're stacked in the different distance waiting to land. But the other really interesting things is baby spirits attached to the adopted mother's energy field as well as the birth mother's energy field with adopted babies and
Wow.
adopted children, which is really interesting. The first time I saw that, I thought, okay, that's a game changer.
Now, and I've also heard that is there kind of a time frame when the soul attaches to this young life form? I mean, is there a certain time frame that you're aware of that the soul actually attaches to it?
What I've read, and I can ask the question, what I've read is 5 to 6 months in utero, 5 to 6 months gestation that the spirit, but the interesting thing about that though is that with a woman that I did a private session with today, I see baby spirits of this was a miscarried baby at 8 weeks. And that baby spirit was with her mother's spirit who has recently died, like last Thursday. And so I was talking to her daughter and we were having a conversation with the mom who just passed. And the mom was holding an infant. And I was telling my client that, and she said, well, who is it? And I asked the mom, and she said it was my client's baby. And my client said, I've never been pregnant. The mom said, oh, yes, you have. And this baby was a miscarried baby at, I think, right around 8 weeks
And
gestation.
interesting. Now, I've had a few guests on the show who have experienced near death, who had near death experiences. There seems to be some similarities in accounts when it comes to near-death experiences. A lot of the experiencers seem to experience some sort of tunnel. There seems to be some sort of life review. What do you, from what you've researched or what you've gathered, is there some sort of life review we go through after we pass on?
Yes, I think there is, if we choose to do that. Yeah. But there's no judgment connected with it.
And I see, that's one of the things I see with kind of the traditional teachings of religion is a lot of people seem to be, I don't know, fearful of judgment, of dying. And I mean, is there really anything that we have to fear
No,
in dying?
no, it's a glorious occasion in the spirit world because we're surrounded by our deceased loved ones, our deceased pets, and angels. And angels carry us to heaven. And so there's a prayer said at the end of every Catholic funeral mass called In Paradisum. And it talks about the angels and your loved ones will greet you and lead you into paradise. Best in my research, I could figure out it originated as a 5th century Gregorian chant. And I have to believe that since the beginning of time, people could see what I see. I call it the 12 phases of transition. And it's the position of angels around someone. And there's a chart of these graphics on my website, askjulieryan.com, that anybody can go look at it. And I can scan somebody anywhere in the world, and whatever phase they're in, I can tell how close to death they are, and I can communicate with the person who's dying, whether they can communicate with their family or not. But the thing about religions and cultures is, what's a great motivator? Fear, right? Well, fear has been used to motivate people and to control the masses since the beginning of time. And people who are raised in those religions and cultures, when they're getting close to death, or their loved one is, they're afraid whether are they gonna fly, or are they gonna fry, because of everything they've been taught. And it's hard to change that paradigm when it's been so ingrained for so many centuries. But no, there's no judgment. It's just smooth. People who have died, once I talk to their spirits, they all say it's so much easier to die than it is to be born.
Interesting. Although I think some people would say they fear the process of dying.
Right.
Say you're in a plane crash or something. I think that's one of the scariest scenarios when I think of, I certainly believe without a doubt that you pass on in spirit form. I think it's just more the process of, going through, especially if it was a tragic death.
Yeah.
And I think some people are, even people with similar abilities that I've had on the show, like you, still say, yeah, I still fear that. The process of, dying, whether it was some sort of tragic death or something. But yeah, and it's very reassuring and encouraging to know that we ultimately don't have to fear death. And it's just, and I've heard it said before, it's like walking from one room to the next.
Right. Right. I use the analogy of, if you've ever been in an emergency room where they have bays, or in perhaps a hospital room where back in the day they used to have double occupancy in a hospital room, and they'd have a curtain that would close between the beds. Like, you're not going to hear what they're talking about in the next bed when the doctor comes in. That's crazy. But they don't do so much that anymore. It's more that it's an individual room for patients. But it's like, you can see the person when the curtain's open. When they close the curtain, the person's still there. You just can't see them with our normal human senses. With that, it's interesting you're afraid of airplane crashes coming from the Air Force, for heaven's sakes.
I know, and that's funny, isn't it? But
Yeah.
and I do, and to this day, I've flown a million times, and I still to this day have a fear of flying.
That may
But
be a past life thing.
it it very well could be. And it's just one of those things. If there was a certain way I think that I would fear dying, that would be one of the biggest ones, would be that way. The other thing that I wanted to ask, and this is going back to the idea of ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm a paranormal investigator, so I'm going out at times looking for them. I don't do it as much as I used to. This idea that spirits are kind of trapped, or they're staying behind, is it something that they don't know that they can move on, and they need someone to help them transition? Or from your perspective, how does that work?
Yeah, there was a family here in Birmingham, interestingly enough, was preparing Thanksgiving dinner a couple of years ago. And the daughters of the grandmother that lived in this house, they were all in the kitchen, and they watched these antique utensils come up off of the wall as they were preparing the Thanksgiving dinner, and fall on the countertop. They all looked at each other and thought, oh my word, what the heck just happened? We haven't really had much wine to drink yet. What is going on? And so, of course, the next day they were calling me and saying, okay, what's up? Well, what we found was that the home that the grandmother lived in now, that lives in now, was in a housing development that at one point had been a farm. And the family had sold off the land a long time ago. It had been a pretty good sized farm. And so we got the name of the family that was the original owners of this farm. And it was a father and two sons. One of the sons was dressed in a Confederate soldier's uniform, and he had been killed in the war, but he had come back and he was looking for his 4-year-old daughter. I don't remember the name of the daughter. He gave it to us. And so he didn't know. It was like he was stuck in this time warp. He kept looking for his daughter, but he didn't know he was dead. And so the father was there and another son was there as well, and they were all there and they were trying to find this little girl. Well, this little girl had grown up and died, many years before. So we called in the little girl, and she showed up as a 4-year-old and helped them all go into the light. So sometimes there's a little bit of help that's needed. There was another situation where I had a client that told me that she was going through some marital issues and was really upset with her husband about infidelity or whatever. And she was sitting in the living room one night, and there was a spirit that was coming through the front door, and her front doors apparently were very dense, big, heavy wooden front doors. And she said the image of this spirit's face just was so distorted. It looked like a robber that had pantyhose on their face. You've seen those in movies. You know what
Right.
I'm talking about? They put like
Yeah.
pantyhose on their face to
I think
disguise
of I
themselves.
think of the movie Raising Arizona when you say
There
that.
you go. And she went to they had an umbrella stand, she said, next to the front door, and she said her son had a golf club. He was practicing a golf shots or something in the front yard. So she went and got a golf club, and she acted like she was gonna hit the spirit. And she said, "You get out of my house right now. You are not allowed in my house." And she was telling me the story, and she said, "I had an evil spirit." I said, "Well, that wasn't an evil spirit. Come to find out, it was a man who had died when he was out of town, and this was, I think, in 1920s, something like that. And he was looking for his daughter. Well, his daughter had reincarnated as my friend's daughter.
Oh wow.
So the spirit was looking for his daughter, and then we got all this information about their life and stuff like that. It was really touching. But I said there aren't evil spirits. There's no judgment when somebody dies. We're surrounded by angels. I said to one man who was dying, he was afraid he was going to have to go to purgatory. He was Catholic, and I said, "You're not going to go to purgatory." And he said, "Well, how do you know?" I said, "I've never seen angels drop somebody into a burning pit." I mean, all
Right.
the hundreds of times I've worked with families and I watch angels escort somebody to heaven. Interesting. Can I tell you a story about that you'll appreciate with your Air Force background?
Absolutely.
The 12 phases of transition are how angels are positioned. Again, you can get it on my website, askjulieryan.com. And midway through, the you alluded to near-death experiences before, how people they perceive going through a tunnel. That's what I see happen. But when they get out of the tunnel, their spirit hangs on to the top of the head, Curry, and it looks like a cartoon caption bubble where the
Hmm.
words or the thoughts of the cartoon character are. And so halfway through the 12 phases of transition, there are two additional angels that show up. Angels surround this person as they're dying. Two additional angels show up, and their wings start to move. And their wings create a draft, an upward pull that creates a vortex. So I'm watching this for the first time with my own mother, and I'm thinking, God, am I hallucinating? Am I going through a midlife crisis? What is going on here? Long story short, that upward draft I witnessed for the first time again with my own mother was it separates the spirit from the body. So when I was writing my book, I had always felt like it reminded me of a giant owl. If you've ever seen a documentary on a giant owl, their wings, they're silent, but you can almost feel the drag that they create when they fly through the air. So I just Googled for kicks, um, owl's wings vortex, and I got unlimited pages about the wingtip vortex, which is what every flying insect, bird, jet, plane, glider, whatever, kite uses to get the lift into the air. And I thought, well, for heaven's sakes, that's what this movement of these angel wings is causing, a wingtip vortex, which helps the spirit separate from the body and get lifted and get escorted to heaven by these two angels. It's wild. So these
Wow.
12 phases of transition can happen instantly in the case of a suicide or a homicide or somebody dying instantly, like in a plane crash, like you were talking about, or they can take days, weeks, months. Even I have a podcast that's weekly, and I had a woman that called into my show for 2 years, and her father was in phase 11 of 12. He was ready to go for 2 years till he finally died.
It's interesting. So, there's a lot of, and you already mentioned it, family members as well coming. So these, like I said, we're calling them ghosts, people that are kind of trapped here. Is it just they're refusing to go? I mean, what happens that really keeps them trapped down here? Is it really, and I've also heard this, somebody who doesn't accept, if you want to call it an atheist,
Mm-hmm.
somebody that doesn't accept anything beyond this realm, this earthly realm. Are those some of the people that stay trapped? I'm just curious because, again, going back to that family members or angels try and transition them, what keeps them kind of held down?
I think it's such a minute percentage of people that die that happens to. I mean, it's a minuscule percentage of 1% that happens to. And I think that it's just they don't know they're dead because they feel like there's still something that they need to accomplish in this lifetime. Is my perception of it. Certainly it's feasible that that spirit wants to experience what it feels like to be between both worlds, being in spirit form, but being in this reality, only in spirit form, not connected to a body anymore. And I think there's so many feasible explanations that are hard for our human minds to comprehend. And certainly there would be limitless explanations, but those are the ones that I come up with, that they don't know they're dead and they have unfinished business.
One of the other things that I wanted to talk about is there's kind of this thought that, we're going through this spiritual awakening to a certain degree, but I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts on that. Do you think the world is starting to have a spiritual awakening, that people are waking up to more of what we're talking about here? And, because again, we go back to traditional religion, it really doesn't teach that. And I think that's really hard for some people.
I don't know that I would call it an awakening. I would call it a reawakening. I think that we have known all this spiritual stuff since the beginning of time, and it has been edited out of holy scriptures and holy texts by powerful people in charge of religions and the masses. Certainly the Roman government, when they were in control of the church, they such and such at Constantinople happened, and such the night at Nicaea, and lots of things were edited out. And certainly with all the translations throughout the centuries, things have been edited out to facilitate whatever the people that were in power wanted it to be and wanted it to look like at the time. So I think that, as I mentioned before, with the 12 phases of transition, people have been able to see that since the beginning of time. And maybe it took till the 5th century when someone was educated enough that they could read and write. And certainly some of the most learned people were men in monasteries. They were the keepers of all of the literature and all of that for centuries. But I think as we've become more well-educated, Curry, that we have wanted to have scientific proof for things that we just intuitively knew. And what I'm seeing is there's more and more scientific proof that's coming out to validate a lot of the stuff that we've known intuitively and that people have talked about in cultures. Certainly, indigenous cultures have all kinds of different rituals and beliefs that correlate with other indigenous cultures that they've never been exposed to. But there's a similar thread of belief and of experience that goes through all those different cultures. Does that
Right.
answer your question?
No, I think it does, and I appreciate that. I think I wanted to get back to this kind of this notion of, I think this is where a lot of people, and I'll be honest, I've had a hard time with this as well. Uh, our upbringing, we're taught that, there's consequences to everything we do. And, if you murder somebody, if you do certain things, there's going to be consequences. And I think that's where a lot of people have a difficult time with what we're talking about here, because they think, Hitler, he killed 8 million Jews. There were no consequences for those actions. And I think that's where a lot of people have a hard time with this, is they think, well, there's got to be good and evil, and there's got to be consequences for actions that happen and what you do in this world when you move on to the next.
Yeah, and all spirits are limitless beings of love. So even Hitler's spirit is a limitless being of pure love. So all of the character traits like a Hitler or somebody that is a criminal or has done, awful, what we would judge to be awful things when they lived, all of those character traits and personality traits stay with the body. So again, back to what we were talking about with past lives, perhaps Hitler was persecuted in a previous life. Perhaps he was the son of someone persecuted. Perhaps he was the parent of somebody. Perhaps he was the spouse of, I mean, it's endless, the different perspectives on that you could see that he perhaps in this lifetime during World War II wanted to come back and be the persecutor. And is that the way it is? Certainly it's feasible. We're going to know once we die, but that's what I get. What I get from spirit is all spirits are pure positive love, and that all of the personality traits stay with the body when somebody dies.
Interesting. The other thing that I kind of wanted to talk about a little bit is now this idea that you keep coming back in multiple lives. Now, when we transition to spirit form, does that go on for a long period of time before we transition back, or is that different for everybody?
I think it's different for everybody. And then I think it's important to remember that our linear time is a human concoction, it's a human invention, and that our linear time is not necessarily spirit world time. So, for instance, 100 years in our world, in our human world, could be a nanosecond in the spirit world. So, it's hard for our human brains to grasp that concept, just to know that, all right, our perception of time is irrelevant in the spirit world. So it could be something that's 100 years in our time, but it's a nanosecond in the spirit world with somebody to come back. And it changes. It's all that spirit's prerogative to say, okay, well, this is where I am. This is what I've co-created. That was fun. Maybe I'll come back and I'll look at the same situation from a different perspective. So what I believe is that we choose where we're born, when we're born, to whom we're born, so that our lives have a basic trajectory so that we can experience whatever it is we want to experience in this lifetime.
Interesting. And I always like to ask this question. with people with your abilities, what is the kind of the overarching message that they always want the spiritual world, whether it be spiritual guides or angels, that they want to communicate to us for us to learn in this lifetime?
That we're loved, and all spirits are pure love. And so, uh, and that we can control what we experience based on what our thoughts are, because thoughts also have a frequency. Every thought has a frequency, Curry. And so most of us think that our thoughts originate in our heads. They don't. Our heads are like big satellite dishes, and the thoughts are all out there in the ethers in the universe. And based on what our thinking is, we pull in other thoughts. Again, like tuning to a radio station. You're on the jazz frequency, you're going to get jazz music. You switch to the classical music frequency, you're going to get classical music. So we've all experienced having a negative thought about something. We're depressed or we're angry or whatever. And then before we know it, we have all these other thoughts along those lines that come in, and we feel like we're in a black hole or we're on a spinning hamster wheel of that negativity. So what we want to do is we want to break that connection, go to a different frequency, and and change what our thought is, because then we're on a different thought frequency. We can pull in thoughts that are going to be beneficial. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes it's easier said than done,
Right, right.
but yeah, absolutely. And I do believe that. I mean, I believe that oftentimes we choose to think the way we do, and we're kind of the masters of our own destiny to a certain degree. But then that kind of begs the question too: if we come into a certain life here, is it to a certain degree kind of predestined what we are going to experience in that lifetime?
I think what's predestined is, again, back to the past life discussion of a couple of minutes ago, we have a basic premise of what we want to experience. And then we can take that in any direction that we want. And so we're always co creating with God, I believe. So that goes back to my earlier mention of the future's fluid, because there are so many variables that come into play. We hear about the proverbial fork in the road. Well, there's the proverbial fork in the road that's predicated on what are the variables that are coming in that are going to affect what our choices are at any given moment. And we don't have the capacity in our human brains to, I don't know that the algorithms exist, even in the computer or the IT world, to come up with all of the possible millions or billions of scenarios that can happen, because there are so many variables that come into play. From flying, my goodness, you can have a flight plan, and then weather happens, or something happens mechanically with the plane, or something happens with one of your crew members, or there are a multitude of factors that can come into play that can affect when you leave, what time do you leave, when do you arrive, that kind of thing. So it's the same situation in life.
We used to say in the military, no good plan survives first contact.
There you go.
Well, Julie, it has been a fascinating discussion, and I've really enjoyed, kind of picking your brain on some of these concepts. It's amazing stuff, and it does really kind of open your mind to thinking about, this is just this is a temporary place, and we move on and we continue to move on. It's just, I think it's hard for us to wrap our brain around the eternal, and that we move on and continue to live eternally. And I think for a lot of us, it's hard to just wrap our brain around that concept. But it's reassuring, and it's good to know, because I think the more people hear this message that they really don't have anything to be afraid of when they pass on. There's so much, there's still so much baggage, I think, with that, and with the concept that we do certain things, we're going to a certain place, and that's it. And so it is reassuring to hear that we all move on, and we get to experience the afterlife, And I appreciate so much you spending the time with me and talking with me about this. And can you just for the listener, can you just tell us where we go to find information about your work, your book, and the things that you do?
Sure. AskJulieRyan.com. AskJulieRyan.com has information on I do a show every Thursday night, Curry, and it's a call-in show. So people call in from all over and ask me to scan them medically, scan their dog. They want to talk to their deceased grandma. They want to do a past life thing. They want romance advice or career advice or I'm moving advice or things like that. And it's a ball. I can normally get between 10 and 12 people on in an hour. And so we're moving fast. So
Sure.
that's really fun. That information's there. My books are there, Angelic Attendants. And there's lots of information about the afterlife. There's lots of information about near-death experiences I've found in published work. But there's not a lot about what happens as we're dying. And that's what my book talks about, is how we're surrounded by angels and deceased loved ones. And it makes it very comforting for those who've just lost a loved one or those who are in the process of losing a loved one. Or, let's face it, we're all going to be in that position at some point with ourselves and with our loved ones. So I think it's helpful to know what's going to happen there. And then I have a children's book coming out next month called Angel Messages for Kids. So that will be available on the site too. And, it'll link to Amazon or Barnes and Noble or wherever you want to go. And so everything's at AskJulieRyan.com. I'm at AskJulieRyan on Instagram and on Facebook. And we have a lot of fun with all of this.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll have to tune in. What time is that your show on Thursday nights?
It's at 8 Eastern on Thursday nights. And unless Halloween, like last week, I didn't do a live show because I was passing out candy to the trick-or-treaters, or Thanksgiving is on a Thursday, so we won't do a live show. If Christmas is on a Thursday, we're not going to do that. But pretty much every other Thursday night, we're doing it. And so check on Instagram and Facebook at Ask Julie Ryan, and I'll always post, okay, live show tonight or not doing a show in the call-in numbers and stuff with that.
All right. Well, once again, thanks for spending the time with me, Julie. And I know you are busy and you have a lot going on, so I really appreciate you talking with me and spending the time talking about this stuff.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You have a great night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay, that'll do it for tonight's show. And a big thanks to Julie Ryan for sitting down and talking with me for a bit. And make sure you don't miss next episode. I'm going to have Terry Lovelace joining me. And Terry has documented a very fascinating yet disturbing UFO and alien abduction encounter he and a friend of his had way back in 1977. The book is called The Incident at Devil's Den, and so he's going to be sharing that story with me and talking with me about that. So great to have Terry going to be joining me on the show. And once again, thank you so much for tuning into the show, and have a great night, everybody.